Ancient Egypt, a civilization known for its mystique and grandeur, also harbored unspoken secrets. These exploration reveals 10 filthy secrets that unveil a less glamorous side of the land of pyramids and pharaohs. From beauty rituals to royal practices, these intriguing aspects offer a candid view into a world often shrouded in majesty and mythology. Number 1. Hygiene and beauty rituals. While ancient Egypt has often been celebrated for its ornate artistry and aesthetic appeal, the underbelly of its hygiene and beauty practices were quite complex. Hygiene was not just about personal cleanliness, but was tied to a spiritual belief system. Filthy or not, these practices were deeply entrenched in their culture. The Egyptians were renowned for their elaborate beauty rituals, which extended to both men and women. Cosmetics like eye makeup made from malachite and galena were common. However, these substances could contain harmful elements like lead, making them potentially toxic. In terms of hygiene, bathing in the Nile was a daily practice for many Egyptians. Yet the river was not always clean and could carry diseases. They would filter the water through cloth, but this method was not always effective. Cleansing rituals often involved the use of natron, a naturally occurring soda ash mixed with oil, creating a form of soap. While innovative, this substance could be harsh and abrasive on the skin. Beauty and cleanliness were not mere vanity projects, but were connected to societal status and religious purity. These practices, although seemingly filthy by modern standards, were necessary in the context of ancient Egyptian life and values. The hygiene and beauty rituals of ancient Egypt, although innovative for their time, often involved practices that might seem unclean or hazardous today. The intersection between hygiene, beauty, spirituality, and societal norms in ancient Egypt paints a picture that challenges our contemporary understanding of cleanliness and aesthetics. The complexity of these rituals underscores a civilization that was advanced, yet rooted in traditions that may appear quite alien to modern sensibilities. Number 2. Medical practices and surgeries. The medical practices of ancient Egypt, despite their rudimentary nature, laid some foundational elements for modern medicine. However, their techniques, beliefs, and methods were often crude and perilous by today's standards. Ancient Egyptian physicians were known to employ a variety of treatments ranging from herbal remedies to surgical procedures. Medical papyri, such as the Edwin Smith Papyrus, offer insights into their understanding of ailments, diagnostics, and treatments. The underlying philosophy often mixed scientific observations with spiritual beliefs, leading to practices that might be considered unsanitary or even barbaric today. Surgical instruments were made from bronze, wood, or stone, and would likely have been challenging to keep clean. Although there's evidence that they knew about and practiced some forms of antiseptic methods, the risk of infection was probably high. Wounds were often treated with honey and grease, and though honey has natural antibacterial properties, the lack of sterilization in other areas of their practice could be seen as alarming. The Egyptians performed surgeries like trepanation, drilling holes into the skull, to treat specific conditions. These procedures, while groundbreaking for their time, were fraught with dangers, often leading to infection or death. Childbirth was another area where medical practices were far from ideal. Midwives assisted in deliveries, employing rituals, prayers, and incantations along with physical aid. The maternal mortality rate was likely high, and the remedies used to facilitate childbirth would be considered strange or unsafe by contemporary standards. Embalming and mummification, though not medical practices in the traditional sense, involved a deep understanding of anatomy and chemistry. The removal of organs and preservation of bodies with natron and resins would have been a messy and unpleasant task, far removed from the sanitized environments of modern medical practice. The physicians of ancient Egypt were undoubtedly skilled and innovative, with a profound impact on the history of medicine. Yet their practices, tools, and beliefs, viewed through the lens of contemporary medical understanding, reveal a side of their civilization that contrasts sharply with the sanitized, technology-driven approach of today. The so-called filthy secrets of their medical practices serve as a vivid reminder of how far human civilization has come in understanding and treating the human body. Number 3. Embalming processes and mummification. Mummification, the process of preserving the body after death, is perhaps one of the most fascinating and iconic aspects of ancient Egyptian culture. However, the methods used in mummification were complex and, by today's standards, could be considered quite unsanitary and gruesome. The embalming and mummification process was integral to the Egyptians' belief in eternal life, where preserving the body allowed the deceased to continue their journey in the afterlife. This process was reserved for royalty and the elite, reflecting social status and religious significance. The initial step in mummification was the removal of internal organs. The brain was extracted through the nostrils using long hooks, a process that could be considered particularly unsettling. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were also removed and preserved in canopic jars, often with little regard for cleanliness or infection control. The body was then washed and covered in natron, a type of salt, for several weeks to dry it out completely. This left the corpse looking shriveled and decayed, a far cry from the glorified depictions often associated with mummies. Resin and oils were used to soften the dried skin, and the body was stuffed with linen or other materials to give it a more lifelike appearance. This aspect of the process required embalmers to handle the decaying body extensively, something considered unsanitary by modern practices. The wrapping of the body in linen was an intricate procedure involving prayers, amulets, and rituals. Magic spells were often written on the bandages to protect the deceased in the afterlife. The inclusion of these spiritual elements within the physical process underscores the deep interconnection between the mundane and the divine in ancient Egyptian culture. The embalming processes and mummification practices of ancient Egypt, while reflecting a profound spiritual belief system, reveal procedures and handling that would undoubtedly be deemed filthy and unsanitary by contemporary norms. The handling of organs, the drying and reshaping of the corpse, and the lack of sterilized instruments all add to a picture that contrasts sharply with the reverence and mystique often associated with Egyptian mummies. These practices were not just about preservation, but were deeply tied to the Egyptians' worldview and spiritual beliefs. Understanding them helps to uncover a less polished, more visceral aspect of a civilization known for its grandeur and sophistication, and challenges modern sensibilities with a glimpse into a complex and sometimes unsettling past. Number 4. Slavery and labor conditions. The grand structures and accomplishments of ancient Egypt would not have been possible without a vast labor force. The conditions under which laborers, slaves, and servants worked, however, were often harsh and difficult, reflecting aspects of the civilization that were far from glamorous. Slavery in ancient Egypt was more nuanced than the chattel slavery commonly associated with more recent history. Slaves were typically prisoners of war, foreign captives, or those who fell into debt. They could own personal property and even other slaves, but their lives were bound to their masters, and their treatment could vary widely. The work slaves and laborers were tasked with was frequently grueling and dangerous. Constructing monuments like the pyramids required quarrying massive stone blocks using simple tools, transporting them across great distances, and lifting them into place without the aid of machinery. Accidents, injuries, and fatalities were likely common, and medical care for laborers was rudimentary at best. Living conditions for workers could be harsh. While some skilled laborers were provided with housing and provisions, others might have lived in cramped and unsanitary conditions. Food was basic, often consisting of bread, beer, and onions, lacking in the nutrition needed for the heavy labor they were performing. Workers' rights were minimal, but not entirely absent. There were instances when laborers protested for better conditions or went on strike for more rations. The ruling elite could sometimes heed these demands, reflecting a somewhat complex relationship between workers and their overseers. Despite the grim conditions, slaves and laborers were integral to religious and funerary practices. They could be involved in temple rituals or buried with their masters to serve them in the afterlife. This intertwining of labor, servitude, religion, and death paints a multifaceted picture of their societal role. The secrets of slavery and labor in ancient Egypt are not merely tales of subjugation and suffering. They provide a window into the complexities of a society where grand achievements were built on the back of human labor and where the line between servitude and citizenship was blurred. Unraveling these secrets offers a more nuanced understanding of a civilization that continues to fascinate and mystify, even as it confronts us with uncomfortable truths about human nature and social organization. Number 5. Sexual practices and taboos. Sexuality in ancient Egypt was interwoven with societal norms, religious beliefs, and cultural traditions. It was a subject both celebrated and constrained, filled with practices that might be considered provocative or even scandalous today. In ancient Egypt, sexuality was not shrouded in shame. Rather, it was often considered a vital part of life and even spirituality. Fertility was highly prized, and sexual prowess was seen as a sign of strength and vitality. However, there were also strict rules and taboos surrounding sexual conduct. Marriage was typically arranged, and while premarital sex was not necessarily taboo, adultery was a severe offense, especially for women. The double standard between men and women was pronounced, reflecting the patriarchal structure of society. Prostitution was known to exist, particularly in temple contexts, where sacred prostitution might have been practiced. This controversial subject is still debated among scholars, but some evidence suggests that sexual acts within temples might have been performed as offerings to deities, particularly fertility gods. Homosexuality is another area where historical understanding is complex. While there are depictions and texts that might suggest same-sex relationships, interpreting them through a modern lens can be challenging. It is unclear how these relationships were viewed within society, and the subject remains a contentious one among Egyptologists. Incest, particularly among the royal family, was not uncommon. Marriages between siblings or close relatives were sometimes used to maintain the purity of the royal bloodline. These practices, seen as necessary for political and religious reasons, would be considered highly taboo today. Ancient Egyptian sexual norms and practices were multifaceted, reflecting a society that embraced sexuality as a natural and vital force while also constraining it within strict boundaries and taboos. The duality of celebration and restriction, openness and secrecy, mirrors the complex nature of sexuality in human societies throughout history. In unraveling the secrets of ancient Egyptian sexual practices and taboos, we are confronted with a view of sexuality that challenges modern Western assumptions. It reveals a civilization that was neither prudish nor libertine, but navigated the complexities of sex, power, and morality in ways that continue to intrigue and perplex. The legacy of these practices provides a rich and often surprising insight into human nature, social organization, and the timeless interplay between the physical and the spiritual. It reminds us that the past's so-called filthy secrets can be windows into understanding ourselves and our ancestors in more profound and nuanced ways. Number 6. Incestuous royal marriages. One of the more unsettling practices within ancient Egypt, particularly among the royal family, was the custom of incestuous marriages. These marriages, often between siblings or close relatives, were not merely a matter of personal choice, but were entrenched in religious beliefs, political strategy, and the preservation of royal authority. The pharaoh was seen as a divine being, a mediator between the gods and humans, and as such, the royal bloodline's purity was considered essential. Marrying within the family was a means to maintain that divine lineage, free from contamination by common blood. Incestuous unions were common among several dynasties. Perhaps the most famous example is the marriage between Tutankhamun and his half-sister Ankhesenamun. Other notable instances include the unions between siblings within the Ptolemaic dynasty, where brother-sister marriages were a recurring theme. These incestuous practices were not confined to legend or myth, but were well documented in historical texts, art, and inscriptions. They were an accepted part of royal life, sanctioned by religious tradition and political necessity. The practice had its roots in the mythology of the gods. Osiris and Isis, central figures in the Egyptian pantheon, were both siblings and spouses. This divine example provided a sacred precedent for the royal family, making these marriages not only acceptable but symbolically powerful. Political challenges also arose from this custom. The tightly knit royal family, bound by these incestuous connections, might experience power struggles, rivalry, and conflict, impacting the stability and governance of the kingdom. It's essential to understand that incestuous royal marriages in ancient Egypt were not seen as aberrant or immoral within their cultural context. They were a complex interplay of theology, politics, and tradition, aiming to preserve the sanctity and continuity of the royal line. These marriages, which may appear shocking and repugnant to modern sensibilities, offer a profound insight into a civilization where the boundaries between the divine and human, personal desire and political expediency were fluid and often overlapping. The filthy secret of incestuous royal marriages challenges our contemporary values and ethics, confronting us with a cultural practice that defies easy judgment. It invites us to delve deeper into the intricate web of beliefs, symbols, and social structures that shaped one of history's most remarkable civilizations, reflecting a world where love, power, and divinity were uniquely intertwined. Number 7. Religious rituals and sacrifices. The religious practices of ancient Egypt were central to its culture and daily life. These practices often involved intricate rituals and sacrifices that might seem foreign or even shocking to modern sensibilities. The secrets behind these religious practices provide insight into a complex and profound spiritual world. Sacrifices were a crucial part of the religious landscape in ancient Egypt. Animals such as bulls, birds, and goats were commonly sacrificed to various deities. The act was not merely a matter of killing, it was a highly ritualized process, with specific methods for different gods and purposes. The preparation of the animals was a ceremonial affair. They were carefully chosen, often raised explicitly for this purpose, and adorned with special markings or decorations. Priests would conduct elaborate rituals, including purification and prayers, before the actual sacrifice took place. Some rituals required the blood or specific organs of the sacrificed animals. These were seen as potent symbols, carrying divine energy or appeasing the god's wrath. The physical act of sacrifice was believed to have real effects in the spiritual world, influencing everything from agricultural fertility to the outcome of battles. Human sacrifice, though highly debated among scholars, appears to have been practiced, particularly in the early periods of Egyptian civilization. Evidence from certain tombs and texts suggests that servants or slaves were sometimes killed to accompany their masters in the afterlife. This practice seems to have waned in later periods, replaced by symbolic representations. However, to label these as merely filthy secrets would be to miss their profound significance. These practices were expressions of a spiritual worldview that saw the cosmos as interconnected and alive with divine forces. Sacrifice and ritual were means of participating in this cosmic dance, aligning human actions with divine will. In exploring these ancient rituals and sacrifices, we are invited to step into a world where the boundaries between human, animal, and divine were fluid and permeable. It challenges our sanitized, compartmentalized view of religion, offering a glimpse into a vibrant and holistic spirituality that saw the divine in the mundane, the sacred in the bloody, and the eternal in the transient. It reminds us that the ways in which people connect with the divine can be as diverse and complex as human culture itself, and that the secrets of the past can be windows into understanding the depth and richness of our shared human heritage. Number 8. Crime and punishment. The legal system and methods of crime and punishment in ancient Egypt might seem both familiar and profoundly foreign to modern eyes. The civilization's approach to maintaining law and order was intertwined with its social hierarchy, religious beliefs, and cultural norms, leading to a system that was both practical and symbolically charged. In ancient Egypt, laws were not codified in the way we understand today. Instead, they were often based on precedent, custom, and the pharaoh's decrees. The concept of ma'at, representing truth, order, and justice, guided the legal system. It was not only a legal principle, but a cosmic one, reflecting the balance and harmony of the universe. Crimes ranged from theft and assault to more serious offenses like murder and treason. Punishments were meted out based on the crime's severity, the offender's status, and sometimes the whim of the official in charge. Physical punishments were common and could be brutal. Flogging was a typical penalty for lesser offenses, while more severe crimes could lead to mutilation, such as cutting off a hand for theft. The death penalty was also enforced, particularly for grave crimes like plotting against the king. However, punishment was not always physical. Fines, confiscation of property, forced labor, and public humiliation were other means of dealing with offenders. Sometimes a symbolic punishment, like the destruction of an offender's statue, was deemed sufficient, reflecting the belief in the connection between the physical and spiritual world. Magic and oaths often played a role in legal proceedings. Invoking the gods or undergoing a magical test to prove innocence was not uncommon. These practices reflect the intertwining of law, religion, and magic in a society where the boundaries between these domains were fluid. In exploring the secrets of crime and punishment in ancient Egypt, we encounter a system that is both pragmatic and mystical, grounded in earthly concerns yet imbued with spiritual significance. It challenges modern notions of justice, legality, and human rights, opening a window into a world where law was not a mere social contract, but a reflection of cosmic order. These practices, which might seem harsh or even barbaric to contemporary eyes, offer a glimpse into the complexity and nuance of a society grappling with the eternal human challenges of order, justice, and morality. They remind us that our legal systems are not merely rational constructs, but carry the weight of our deepest beliefs, fears, and aspirations. Number 9. Famine and disease. In the grandeur and mystique that surrounds ancient Egypt, the struggles with famine and disease often remain hidden. These aspects of daily life played a significant role in shaping the civilization's history, leaving marks that still intrigue researchers and historians today. Famine was not an uncommon occurrence in ancient Egypt, a land highly dependent on the Nile's yearly inundation. When the river failed to provide its expected bounty, it could lead to crop failure and widespread hunger. Records from various periods speak of years of famine, where the people suffered and social unrest simmered. Ancient texts and inscriptions describe attempts to manage these crises. Grain was stored in state granaries to be distributed during lean years. Officials were sent to oversee the equitable division of resources, and offerings were made to the gods to appease their perceived wrath. Disease, too, was a constant companion of the Egyptians. Without modern medicine, infections could ravage entire communities. Tuberculosis, polio, parasitic infections, and dental diseases have all been identified in mummies and skeletal remains. The impact of famine and disease on ancient Egyptian society was profound. They influenced political stability, economic activity, religious practices, and even art and literature. The suffering they caused was a part of the human experience, shared by both the elite and the common folk. Yet there is a resilience and ingenuity reflected in how the Egyptians faced these challenges. They developed administrative systems to manage scarcity, medical knowledge to combat illness, and a spiritual framework that provided meaning and comfort in the face of suffering. The secrets of famine and disease in ancient Egypt offer a glimpse into a civilization's vulnerabilities and strengths. They remind us that behind the magnificent pyramids and intricate hieroglyphs were people grappling with fundamental human challenges. These aspects of ancient Egyptian life provide a more nuanced and compassionate understanding of a people often shrouded in myth and stereotype. They remind us that the filthy secrets of the past are often the most human and universal, connecting us across time and culture to our shared human journey. Number 10. Warfare and diplomacy. Warfare and diplomacy were central to the history and expansion of ancient Egypt, shaping the civilization in ways that still resonate today. The tactics used in battle, the subtleties of political negotiation, and the interplay between violence and peace form a complex picture that transcends mere historical curiosity. Ancient Egypt's military might was considerable, bolstered by chariots, skilled archers, and a well-organized infantry. They engaged in numerous wars, not only to defend their borders, but to extend their influence and control over neighboring regions. Campaigns into Nubia, Canaan, and Syria were commonplace and are well documented in inscriptions and art. But warfare in ancient Egypt was not solely about conquest and subjugation. It was deeply intertwined with religious and cultural symbolism. The pharaoh was often depicted as a warrior god, leading his troops into battle, not just as a political leader, but as a divine champion. Victory in war was seen as a manifestation of cosmic order and divine favor. Diplomacy, too, played a vital role in the interplay of power. Alliances, treaties, and marriages between royal families were common diplomatic tools. Letters between rulers, often called the Amarna letters, provide a fascinating insight into the negotiations, flattery, threats, and intelligence gathering that marked the diplomatic relationships of the time. Gift-giving was a prominent diplomatic practice, symbolizing friendship, allegiance, or appeasement. The exchange of exotic goods, prisoners, or even daughters in marriage was a complex dance of honor, obligation, and strategic maneuvering. The balance between warfare and diplomacy was delicate and required careful navigation. A misstep in either could lead to conflict, rebellion, or loss of prestige. The rulers of ancient Egypt, aided by their advisors, had to master the arts of both sword and word to maintain their position and further their interests. This dual approach to international relations was not mere pragmatism, but reflected a deeper understanding of power, influence, and human nature. War and peace were not opposing forces, but part of a continuum, each influencing and shaping the other. The secrets of warfare and diplomacy in ancient Egypt provide a window into a world where might and right, violence and negotiation were part of a sophisticated and nuanced approach to power. They remind us that the strategies and philosophies that guide nations today have deep historical roots. These insights challenge simplistic views of ancient Egypt as a civilization defined solely by its monuments and myths. They reveal a dynamic and complex society, where rulers and generals were not just conquerors but statesmen, diplomats, and thinkers. In exploring these filthy secrets, we encounter a civilization that wrestled with questions of war, peace, power, and ethics in ways that continue to resonate. They offer timeless lessons and reflections that go beyond mere history, speaking to the enduring challenges and dilemmas that continue to shape our world.